Now, it's also been a bloody start to October in the Western Cape. 130 murders in just 1 week as September ended and October started. Now, the police are wanting to bolster their forces, but recruiting 2,600 extra cops to the province. But will this help? Let's speak now to crime expert Guy Lamb, who believes government's ambitious plan to halve the number of reported murders means more resources are needed. He joins us now. Good afternoon, Guy. Well, let's just begin there. 2,600 cop recruits over the next 2 months to be deployed in the Western Cape. You say that's not enough?
Well, it really depends on the type of recruits that we're getting. Because, I mean, in these kind of contexts within the Western Cape, they are kind of freshly minted police recruits. There's still many, many years they need to get under the belt in terms of experience. And if the Western Cape, which has, amongst, disproportionately represented in terms of the highest kind of murder station areas throughout South Africa, and if you want to get a handle on that, you need experienced police officials who are able to investigate these kind of murders and put together enough evidence for cases to be prosecuted in court. So certainly bringing in more police personnel into the Western Cape will help, because you'll have more police visibility. It will kind of reduce the opportunities for crime. It will also kind of bolster the sort of resources at station level. So if people have complaints they want to take to the police, and for police to investigate those complaints, that there are more people at their disposal. But the challenge is, the sort of the shootings and the murders we've been seeing concentrated in the past week or so. Now, that largely has to do with organized criminal groups. It has to do with kind of groups that kind of perpetuate collective violence. And you need experienced cops and dedicated units to deal with that. So the recruits will help, but they certainly won't make a major difference in the short term.
Yeah, you need experience, skills on the grounds. But also my understanding is that these shootings we've seen, for example, the 130-odd people killed in the last week of September into the early part of October, are not all over the place. I mean, there are specific areas where they are. Surely the police can focus the more of their good resources there to reduce the murder rates.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the sort of the common approach to reducing very high levels of violent crime, particularly murder or attempted murder, is it tends to be concentrated throughout the world. It's concentrated in specific areas, concentrated in specific neighborhoods. And we've got really good data that shows if you take the sort of hotspot approach and focus on those areas, focus on the perpetrators, focus on the weapons that are used to perpetrate those violence, you can have quite an impact on it. But the challenge is, in many of the areas where we see very high levels of violence, we tend to see very low levels of trust in the police. So you've got, members of the public and residents in those areas who are victims of this crime and often are too scared to come forward and report it to the police. They don't trust the police. There will be very negative consequences for them if they decide to open a case against individuals who perpetrate crime. So it is very difficult police work to be pursued here. But that is why we do need experienced, well-trained police to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, and also dealing with gangsterism and organized crime, it needs a specific skill. Because from what we're hearing, Guy, in terms of, I don't know what your research is showing, is that most of these killings that have happened in and around different parts of the Western Cape recently, in some of those specific areas, are largely gang-driven.
I mean, traditionally within the Western Cape, but it's not exclusive to the Western Cape. The Eastern Cape, certainly around the sort of metros, you see this as well. Also in Gauteng, it just doesn't often get defined as gang violence, but more often it's not. But certainly in the Western Cape, a lot of the violence is driven by competition between the gangs, fighting and conflict between the different types of gangs, and that violence and competition is meted out through the use of firearms usually. And we tend to see a sort of spike or spiral of violence happening. So if you see, one incident happening, there's often reprisal incidences. Sometimes you see gangs that are trying to take over certain neighborhoods and use violence to do that. But we're also seeing this sort of violence playing out in the extortion sector. So the use of extortion by different criminal groups has grown significantly in the country and tends to be kind of quite prominent within the Western Cape. But also we see violence between different minibus taxi associations, and often you see the use of violence being used to try and mediate competition between them.
Yeah. Do you think the police, you've got the national police, but you've got the provincial kind of structures, because there is an MEC for safety in the Western Cape. Do you think they need to coordinate better, and what kind of effective resources they deploy in the Western Cape to reduce this violent crime we're witnessing?
I mean, the interesting thing about the Western Cape is it's probably the only province where you've actually got quite good cooperation between the sort of the city of Cape Town as the major city. You've got the Western Cape provincial government through the community safety department, and you've got national police. So at a sort of an operational level, there is actually quite good cooperation. There are joint operations, there's joint planning that happens. The Western Cape provincial government has its safety plan and does liaise a lot with the city of Cape Town with their safety and security. But of course, at the political level, there's quite a lot of kind of tension between the sort of political leaders, certainly at the city level and at the national level around policing. And this is where a lot of this kind of acrimonious relationship comes in. But actually, there is fairly good relationships that exist. But certainly a lot more could be done to improve that.
Yeah, and bringing these recruits, if they're just going to be at police stations, as you've expressed, or it's not going to help. Just you get your sense, Guy, about this. The training of the police that are deployed, not just in the Western Cape, but just generally, because as you've correctly pointed out, we see violent gang wars everywhere or in major metros of our country, including here in Johannesburg, now and again rearing its ugly head. But it's happening more often than not. Do you think the police as a whole have the required skills to deal with such crimes in our country today? I've just spoken to Dasen Tati, our colleague in Durban, where he interviewed the Cash in Transit Industry Association about the spike we've seen now in this last month of September. There have been more cash in transit heists than the number of days of the month.
I mean, look, in South Africa is quite an exceptional case when it comes to crime. It has very high numbers in terms of most categories of violent crime. If we were to compare them to most other countries, certainly from a murder-homicide rate, we're in the top 10. Policing South Africa is very difficult because of these low levels of trust in the police, low levels of legitimacy. Communities in high crime areas don't trust the police, so it makes the police's job incredibly difficult. The police, go through, pretty decent training, but that's done within a training environment, and then the police really have to hit the streets and engage with, communities that don't trust them and engage in very dangerous environments. So kind of policing high crime areas is incredibly dangerous to the police, and that's why we see police getting killed on a regular basis, because going into a high crime informal settlement puts police lives at risk. Often police are targeted for their weapons. So the training seems to be, internationally acceptable, but it's more around applying that in the very difficult context of South Africa. I think that's really where we find our challenges, because the police become quite easily jaded, become quite frustrated, become traumatized by the environments that they're confronted with. And it's sort of, almost like this endless kind of exposure to trauma. So it is South Africa is a very difficult place to police. So it does make their jobs very difficult. But we still need to there's still important things that need to be done, and there's still room for improvement.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Final question to you, Guy, while I have you as a crime expert. You've mentioned the word weapons, that sometimes police get attacked because the criminals want the guns. But we also have a proliferation of illegal weapons in our country. We hear about it time and again. Some of the stuff is high caliber that is being used. We also need to get a handle on the proliferation of illegal weapons.
Absolutely. I mean, it is the leading weapon that's used in murder and attempted murder, and obviously robberies with aggravated circumstances. Most weapons that are used are handguns. I mean, we do get in certain types of crimes, such as cash in transit, robberies, where you see more high-powered weapons being used, sort of semi-automatic rifles being used. I mean, the challenge here is that, firearms get used multiple times. So weapons are either stolen from, licensed firearm holders, or they're stolen from police officials, or in some cases, we've had sort of police armories that have been robbed. We've had private security companies and personnel being robbed of their weapons. And these weapons just circulate in the illegal economy and are used by criminals multiple times over to commit various kinds of crimes. So it is a key challenge that faces us, and one of the things that would make a difference if we were able to get a serious handle on the proliferation of illegal firearms in South Africa.
Thank you very much. Guy Lamb is a crime expert, giving some of his views about the surge we've seen in murders in the Western Cape recently, but also weighing in on some of the bigger national issues in dealing with crime in our country.